He stood in her office with his coat still on. Not defensive, not begging, just tired in a way that didn't fit the room. Vivian didn't look at him at first. The city stretched behind the glass, steel and light, the kind of view people worked their whole lives to earn. It was one afternoon, he said. Quiet. Her jaw tightened. The board had been waiting. Investors had flown in. Schedules had been locked for weeks. He knew that. She signed the paper without lifting her eyes. He didn't argue again, just nodded once, like he understood something she didn't. Then he left. The door clicked shut. For a moment the office felt smaller. The morning Vivian fired Daniel Brooks, the building felt unusually quiet. Not the lobby. The lobby was always polished and bright and full of movement. Assistants moving with tablets, security nodding to executives. The scent of coffee that didn't come from the cafe downstairs, but from the private machine behind reception. But higher up, where her office was, the air was different, thinner, like the floor itself had learned to hold its breath. Vivian arrived early. She always did. Not because she needed more time, but because she liked being the first one there. It reminded her that the company still moved on her rhythm, that nothing important happened before she decided it should. Her heels clicked down the corridor. A sound she'd grown to trust. Inside her office, the lights were already on. Her assistant, Mara, must have come in before sunrise again. Vivian didn't comment on it. Mara didn't comment on it either. That was their arrangement. The desk was clear, except for a single folder placed perfectly at the center. Vivian knew what it was before she touched it. She set her bag down, took off her coat slowly, rolled her shoulders once, like she was loosening something tight inside her. Then she opened the folder. Daniel Brooks, Senior Operations Manager, a record of 7 years. Consistent performance, quiet promotions, no scandals, no complaints. There was only one problem, a red note stapled to the front page, a schedule conflict report. Vivian's eyes narrowed as she read it again, even though she already had twice this morning from her phone in bed. Daniel Brooks. Absence recorded. Missed executive investor briefing preparation meeting. Reason stated. Personal obligation. Personal obligation. Vivian leaned back in her chair. The leather was cold at first. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and expensive ink. She stared at the skyline outside. Glass buildings. Construction cranes. A city that didn't stop because someone's life got complicated. She could feel her own pulse in her throat. Slow. Controlled. Annoyed. Her phone buzzed once. A message from the chief financial officer. Board call moved up. 10:10. Don't be late. Vivian didn't respond. She didn't need to. She closed the folder, then opened it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more reasonable. But they didn't. She reached for the intercom button. Mara, she said. A beat. Yes, Ms. Hart. Bring Daniel Brooks up to my office. There was a pause on the line. Not long, just long enough. He's already in the building, Mara said. He came early. Vivian's fingers tightened slightly on the intercom. Of course he did. She released the button and sat back again. Her mind tried to stay clean and procedural. She told herself this wasn't personal. She told herself it wasn't anger. It was leadership. If she allowed exceptions, the entire system would start to bend. And once it bent, it would break. She had watched that happen before. She had watched entire companies rot from the inside because someone at the top started feeling guilty. Vivian had promised herself she would never lead that way. She looked at the framed photo on the shelf near the window. Her father, Elliot Hart. He was smiling in it. A real smile. Not the stiff one he used for magazine covers. His arm was around her shoulders. Vivian looked younger, less sharp, less carved. She didn't like looking at it for too long. She turned back toward the folder. Daniel's file included a personal information sheet. Not mandatory. Most employees skipped it, but Daniel had filled his out fully. Married. 1 daughter. Emma. Age 8. Vivian read it once, then shut the folder again harder than she needed to. 8. She tried to imagine what it meant. A child at that age. School projects. Little shoes. Questions at bedtime. It didn't matter, she reminded herself. It didn't matter. The intercom clicked. He's here, Mara said. Send him in. Vivian stood up, but only because she preferred being upright during conversations like this. Sitting felt like negotiating. Standing felt like decision. The door opened. Daniel Brooks stepped in. He wasn't what people expected when they heard the word manager. He didn't have the polished arrogance some men carried like a badge. He wasn't loud. He wasn't slick. He wore a dark suit that fit properly but didn't look new. His tie was straight, but the knot wasn't perfect. His hair was neat but slightly damp, like he'd rushed through the rain. He closed the door behind him carefully, as if he didn't want to disturb anything. Vivian watched him walk forward. He stopped a few feet from her desk. His hands were at his sides. His posture was respectful but not submissive. His face looked tired. Not the kind of tired from staying out late. Something deeper, the kind that settles into a person when they haven't had a real break in a long time. Vivian didn't offer him a seat. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Miss Hart," he replied. His voice was steady. No tremble, no desperation. That almost irritated her more. She picked up the folder and tapped it lightly against the desk. "You missed yesterday's preparation meeting." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." No excuse, no immediate explanation. Just confirmation. Vivian's eyes stayed on him. "That meeting was mandatory. You were informed 2 weeks in advance." "Yes, I was. And yet you weren't there." Daniel's gaze didn't shift. His eyes were a calm brown, the kind that didn't flinch under pressure. Vivian had noticed that about him before, but she'd assumed it was simply professionalism. Now it felt like something else, like restraint. "I wasn't there," he said again. Vivian let the silence stretch. She wanted him to fill it. Most people did. Most people couldn't handle silence in a room like this. But Daniel didn't move. Vivian's jaw tightened slightly. "And your stated reason," she said, lifting the page from the folder, "was a personal obligation." Daniel blinked once. Slow. "It was my daughter's school event," he said. There it was. Vivian felt something in her chest, small and sharp, like a pin pressed under the skin. She didn't let her expression change. "A school event," she repeated. "Yes." Vivian walked around the desk holding the file. She didn't need to do it, but it helped her think. Movement gave her control. She stopped by the window. Below, the city moved like it always did. Cars, people, deliveries, none of them stopping for school events. "This company doesn't run on personal obligations," she said. Daniel's breath came out through his nose. Quiet, almost like a sigh he refused to fully release. "I understand," he said. Vivian turned back toward him. "Do you?" "Yes." His answer came too quickly. Too clean, like he'd rehearsed it. Vivian stepped closer. The distance between them shrank. She could smell faint soap and rain on his coat. "You're in charge of operations," she said. "You know what yesterday's meeting was about. You know what's at stake this week." Daniel nodded again. "I do." "And you still chose not to show up." Daniel's lips pressed together briefly. He looked down for half a second, then back up. "I made a choice," he said. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "A choice?" "Yes." He said it like he wasn't ashamed of it. Vivian felt irritation rise, but she kept it locked behind her ribs. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You don't get to make choices like that in this position," she said. "Not here." Daniel didn't argue. He only said, "I knew there would be consequences." That stopped her for a moment, not because it was dramatic, because it sounded honest. Vivian stared at him. Really stared. He wasn't trying to convince her. He wasn't trying to charm her. He wasn't trying to throw someone else under the bus. He was just standing there, taking it. Vivian hated that. It made her feel like the villain in her own office. She opened the folder again and flipped to the attendance reports. She didn't need to. She already knew what they said. But she needed something to hold on to. Something objective. Something clean. This isn't the first time you've left early, she said. Daniel's face didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. No, he admitted. It's not. Vivian looked up. How many times? Daniel hesitated. 3, he said. In the last 6 months. Vivian's fingers tightened on the paper. And why didn't you disclose that to HR? I did, Daniel said. Vivian paused. He continued. I filed the requests. They were approved by your previous executive assistant. Vivian's stomach tightened. She didn't like surprises. She didn't like discovering that something had happened under her authority without her knowledge. It made her feel exposed. Vivian closed the folder again. And yesterday, she asked, did you file a request? Daniel's voice lowered slightly. No. Vivian's gaze hardened. So, you broke protocol. Daniel nodded. Yes. Vivian stepped back. The room felt too quiet again. She could hear the faint hum of the building, the air system, the distant sound of phones ringing somewhere outside her office. She looked at him and tried to find something careless, something selfish. But Daniel didn't look selfish. He looked like a man who had already spent the night awake, thinking about what this conversation would cost him. Vivian swallowed. She didn't like what that did to her. You should have delegated, she said. I did, Daniel replied. Vivian blinked. He added, I left full instructions. I made sure everything was covered. The team had what they needed. Vivian stared at him. If everything was covered, she said slowly, then why did the meeting fall apart? Daniel's eyes shifted just slightly, like he was choosing his next words carefully. It didn't fall apart, he said. Vivian felt her patience thin. The CFO reported delays. Daniel nodded again. There were delays, he admitted, but nothing critical. Vivian's mouth tightened. That's not your decision to make. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Then he said, quieter, neither was missing my daughter's first award ceremony. Vivian's body went still. The words weren't angry. They weren't accusatory. They were worse than that. They were plain. They landed like a weight. Vivian stared at him, her fingers still gripping the folder. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears. Award ceremony. First, something about that combination made her chest feel strangely tight. She forced herself to breathe slowly. This is a business, she said, voice even, not a family. Daniel looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, as if accepting the final verdict. I know, he said. And for the first time, Vivian realized he wasn't trying to keep his job. He was just trying to keep his dignity. Vivian felt her throat tighten. She didn't let it show. She stepped back behind her desk and set the folder down with controlled precision. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, already prepared. Termination. Mara had printed it before Daniel even walked into the building. Vivian didn't look at the paper as she held it. She looked at Daniel. I'm ending your employment with Hart Consolidated, she said, effective immediately. Daniel's face didn't move, but his hand twitched slightly at his side, like his body had reacted before his mind could. Vivian saw it. She hated herself for noticing. She slid the paper across the desk. Sign it, she said. Daniel looked down at it. The silence stretched. He didn't touch it right away. When he finally did, his fingers moved slowly, carefully, like the paper might burn him. Vivian watched him sign his name. Daniel Brooks. The pen scratched lightly against the surface, a soft sound that felt louder than it should have. When he finished, he placed the pen down gently. Then he looked up. May I say something? He asked. Vivian's stomach tightened. She should have said no. She should have ended it there, but she heard herself say, briefly. Daniel nodded once. I don't regret going, he said. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. Daniel's voice stayed calm. I regret that it cost me this job, he added, but I don't regret being there. Vivian felt something twist inside her. A small part of her wanted to challenge him. to ask him if he thought his daughter would pay his mortgage, but she didn't say it, because the look on his face told her he'd already thought of that. He'd already measured the cost. And he still went. Vivian didn't respond. Daniel straightened his tie once, more out of habit than necessity. Then he turned toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, not dramatically, just like he was checking if he'd forgotten something. He looked back at her. "Thank you for the opportunity," he said. Vivian's lips pressed together. He opened the door and stepped out. The door closed softly behind him. No slam, no bitterness, just a quiet exit. Vivian stood still, staring at the closed door. Her office felt colder now. She didn't sit down. She didn't move. She only stood there, holding the signed paper, and felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Not guilt. Not yet. Something closer to discomfort, like a tiny crack had formed somewhere inside her, and she couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Then the intercom buzzed. "Mara," Vivian said, voice slightly rougher than she intended. "Yes? Clear my schedule for 15 minutes. There was a pause. "Of course." Vivian ended the call and stared out at the city again. The skyline didn't care what she'd just done. The company wouldn't slow down. Everything would keep moving. It always did. But her hands, still holding the paper, felt oddly heavy, and she couldn't stop thinking about the way Daniel had said it. "I don't regret going." Like it was the simplest truth in the world. Like it was worth losing everything. Vivian didn't understand that. Not fully. Not yet. But the unease stayed with her, even when she finally sat down, even when she opened her laptop, even when she tried to focus on the board call. It stayed, quietly, waiting. The board call lasted 43 minutes. Vivian knew because she watched the clock on the wall instead of the faces on the screen. Numbers filled the room. Forecasts, margins, expansion timelines, the language she trusted. Clean, predictable, measurable. She answered questions without hesitation, adjusted projections in real time, corrected one of the directors when he misquoted last quarter's operational efficiency rate. Her voice never shook. When the call ended, the directors thanked her. One of them said, "Sharp as always, Vivian." She gave a small nod, closed the laptop. The silence after the screen went dark felt different from the silence earlier that morning. This one lingered. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her temple once, slow and firm, like she was pressing away a headache that hadn't quite formed. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Mara. "Security confirmed Mr. Brooks has left the building. His access card is deactivated." Vivian stared at the message longer than necessary. Left the building. She imagined him walking through the lobby, past reception, past the company logo carved into stone. The same doors he'd walked through almost every weekday for 7 years. Did anyone notice? Did anyone stop him? She typed a response before she could stop herself. Did he say anything? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "No, Ms. Hart." He thanked the front desk. Vivian's jaw tightened. Of course he did. She set the phone face down on her desk. For a moment she considered calling HR. Making sure the paperwork was processed immediately. Making sure there were no loose ends. Instead, she stood up and walked toward the small bar cabinet in the corner of her office. She rarely used it during the day. She preferred clarity, but her hand hovered over the glass decanter anyway. She didn't pour anything. She closed a cabinet. The glass doors of her office reflected her faintly. A woman in a tailored suit. Perfect posture. Controlled expression. She studied her reflection for a few seconds. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. The words didn't echo. They just sat there. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was from her father. "Dinner tonight, 7:30. Don't cancel." Vivian exhaled slowly. Elliot Hart didn't ask. He informed. She typed back, "I'll be there." A second later, black tie, gala at the Meridian. "Wear something sharp." Vivian almost smiled at that. "I always do," she muttered. She set the phone down and returned to her desk. There were emails waiting. There were contracts that needed reviewing. There was a presentation for next quarter's restructuring strategy that required her attention. She opened the first email, subject line, Operations Follow-up. Urgent. Her stomach tightened briefly before she clicked it. It was from Daniel's deputy, a man named Aaron. Mrs. Lowe. Hart, we redistributed responsibilities following Mr. Brooks' departure. There are some immediate adjustments needed. Would appreciate guidance. Vivian stared at the phrase, Mr. Brooks' departure. It already sounded distant, formal, like he'd chosen to leave. She typed back quickly. Proceed as outlined in the contingency plan. No delays tolerated. She hit send before she could reread it. The afternoon moved in segments. A meeting with legal. The short call with a potential investor. A review of a regional acquisition proposal. Her mind did what it always did under pressure. It narrowed, focused, reduced everything to problems and solutions. But every so often, without warning, an image slipped through. A small auditorium. Rows of folding chairs. A little girl looking toward the back of the room, scanning faces. Vivian shook her head once, subtle but firm. She hadn't asked what the event was. She hadn't asked what award. It didn't matter. At 6:15, she finally stood from her desk. Mara appeared almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for the movement. Car is downstairs, Mara said. Vivian nodded. Good. She slipped on her coat and walked out without looking back at the office. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. She stood alone inside it, watching the numbers descend. 32, 31, 30. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked composed, untouched. But her hands were clenched inside her coat pockets. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, the noise hit her all at once. Conversations. Phones ringing. The faint hum of evening traffic filtering in through the revolving doors. The front desk staff straightened slightly when they saw her. She gave a brief nod as she walked past. Then she saw something that made her step slow. On the reception counter, slightly off to the side, sat a small envelope. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, just placed there. Vivian paused. Was that left for someone? She asked the receptionist. The young woman looked down at it. Oh, Mr. Brooks dropped that off before he left. He said it was for the operations team. Vivian's throat tightened unexpectedly. For the team, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. Vivian stared at the envelope for a moment. She shouldn't care. It wasn't her business anymore. But her hand reached for it before her mind could stop it. I'll make sure it gets to them, she said. The receptionist hesitated. Of course. Vivian walked toward the exit with the envelope in her hand. The car door was already open when she stepped outside. The evening air was cold, sharp against her skin. She slid into the back seat. Meridian Hotel, she told the driver. As the car pulled away, she looked down at the envelope. It was simple. Plain white. No seal. No flourish. She hesitated. Then she opened it. Inside was a short note, handwritten. Vivian read it once. Then again. To the team. Thank you for the years of trust and hard work. Keep taking care of each other. The company is bigger than one person. Daniel. Vivian felt something shift in her chest. No bitterness. No subtle jab. No attempt to defend himself. Just gratitude. Her fingers tightened slightly on the paper. The company is bigger than one person. She had said something similar once during a shareholder meeting. But reading it in his handwriting felt different. It felt less like strategy, more like belief. Vivian folded the note carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The city lights blurred past the window as the car moved through traffic. She tried to focus on the gala ahead. The Meridian would be filled with donors, executives, politicians, people who respected power, people who understood that leadership required hard decisions. She would stand beside her father. She would shake hands. She would accept praise. She would not think about school auditoriums. The car slowed as they approached the hotel. The entrance glowed with warm gold light. Ballettes moved quickly. Cameras flashed as guests stepped out. Vivian straightened in her seat. Before the driver could open her door, she closed her eyes briefly. Just a second. She saw Daniel's face again, not angry, not pleading, just steady. "I don't regret going." Her jaw tightened. She opened her eyes. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. Vivian stepped out of the car, shoulders squared, expression composed. Cameras turned toward her immediately. Ms. Hart. She gave a small, controlled smile, the kind she'd practiced for years. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered overhead, crystal and gold and soft music. Her father stood near the center of the room, already surrounded by people. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that felt almost disarming. He opened his arms slightly. "There she is," Elliot Hart said. Vivian walked toward him. "Good evening, Dad." He kissed her cheek lightly, studied her face. "You look tired," he said quietly. "I'm not." He raised one eyebrow but didn't press. A senator approached them, interrupting the moment. Vivian shifted into conversation mode, discussed growth metrics, talked about global expansion, smiled when appropriate. But through it all, something inside her felt slightly off balance, like a chair with one leg uneven. At one point, her father leaned closer and murmured, "I have someone I want you to meet tonight." Vivian nodded absently. "Another investor?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that." Vivian didn't think much of it. She was still holding the envelope in her clutch. She hadn't meant to bring it inside. But she hadn't left it in the car either. It felt strange in her hand. Light, almost weightless, and yet she couldn't ignore it. As the evening continued, applause echoed from the stage. A host began introducing key contributors to the Foundation's newest initiative. Vivian's attention drifted for just a moment. Then she heard a name that made her body go still. Daniel Brooks. The sound didn't register immediately. It felt like hearing an echo in the wrong room. Vivian's head lifted slowly. Her father was already turning toward the stage. Applause filled the ballroom. Vivian's pulse spiked sharply. She scanned the stage, and there he was, standing under warm lights, in a different suit, looking just as steady. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Her father leaned close to her ear. "That's the man I wanted you to meet," he said softly. Vivian didn't breathe. "He's been advising us quietly for months," Elliot continued. "Brilliant mind, even better character." The applause continued. Vivian felt the floor shift under her feet. "He turned down a higher offer last year," her father added. "Said he valued integrity more than titles." Vivian's mouth went dry. On stage, Daniel accepted a small award. He nodded politely, said something brief into the microphone. She couldn't hear the words. Her ears were ringing. Her father's voice cut through softly. "You know him?" Vivian forced herself to swallow. "Yes," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "I do." And for the first time that day, the crack inside her didn't feel small anymore. It felt wide, unavoidable. Daniel stepped off the stage, and he was walking in her direction. Vivian didn't move, not because she was frozen. She still smiled, still nodded at the people around her. Her face did what it was trained to do. But inside, something turned over, slow and sick. Daniel walked through the crowd like he belonged there. Not like an employee invited out of courtesy. Not like someone nervous in a room full of wealth. He moved calmly, hands relaxed, posture straight. He accepted congratulations with short replies. A handshake, a nod, nothing excessive. Vivian watched him approach. Her father was still smiling beside her, proud in a way that made Vivian feel exposed, like he was holding up a mirror she hadn't asked to see. Daniel's eyes met hers briefly from across the room. There was a pause in his step, barely noticeable, but Vivian caught it. He didn't look surprised. That was what unsettled her first. Not angry, not confused, not a little smug, just aware. Then he came closer and stopped in front of them. "Mr. Hart," Daniel said. Elliot Hart clasped Daniel's shoulder warmly, the kind of gesture reserved for trusted people, not acquaintances. "Daniel," Elliot replied. "You were excellent up there." Daniel gave a small nod. Thank you. Vivian's throat felt tight. She couldn't tell if it was the lights, the room, or something else. Elliot turned slightly toward her, still holding Daniel's shoulder like he was presenting him. You two know each other, Elliot said, amused. That makes this easier. Vivian forced herself to speak. Yes, she said. We do. Daniel looked at her. His expression didn't change, but his eyes held something she didn't like. Not judgment, something closer to quiet disappointment. The kind that didn't need words. Elliot laughed softly. Daniel's been advising me on a few things. Privately. You know how it is. Vivian didn't respond. Her mind was still stuck on one sentence. He's been advising us quietly for months. She had fired him this morning, and her father had been working with him for months. That meant her father had known who Daniel was, had known his value, had known his character. And he hadn't warned her. Or maybe he had expected her to know. Maybe he had expected her to see what he saw. Vivian's fingers tightened around her clutch. The envelope inside it crinkled slightly. Daniel spoke again, polite. Congratulations on the quarter, he said to Vivian. Vivian's lips parted. For a second she couldn't answer. Then she managed. Thank you. It sounded thin, too controlled, like a voice coming through a speaker. Elliot's attention drifted as another executive approached, greeting him loudly. He stepped away for a moment, leaving Vivian and Daniel standing face to face in the middle of the ballroom. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed nearby. Vivian stared at Daniel. He stared back. No hostility, no smugness, no satisfaction, just calm. That calm made her feel worse. I didn't know you were working with my father, Vivian said. Daniel nodded. I assumed you didn't. Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. You assumed? Yes. Vivian swallowed. How long? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Since last summer. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. Last summer meant 8 months. 8 months of her father trusting him. 8 months of Daniel being inside their orbit, and she had reduced him to a policy violation and a signature on paper. Vivian's voice lowered. Why didn't you tell me? Daniel blinked slowly. I wasn't hired to manage your feelings, he said. The words weren't sharp. They were flat, honest. Vivian's jaw clenched. She hated how accurate it felt. A couple passed behind them, and Daniel shifted slightly to the side so they wouldn't bump Vivian. It was a small gesture. Automatic. That made it worse, too. Vivian forced her breath to stay even. You could have mentioned it, she said. At least when I called you into my office. Daniel's eyes held hers. I didn't think it would matter, he said. Vivian's mouth tightened. It mattered. Daniel nodded once, like he accepted that. Then I misjudged you, he said. Vivian felt heat rise behind her ribs. She wanted to say something cold, something that put him back in his place, something that reminded him she still held power, but she couldn't find it, because he was no longer her employee, and he didn't seem like a man who cared about titles. Vivian's gaze dropped briefly to his hands. They were steady. No tremor, no tension. He looked like someone who had already processed what happened, someone who had already moved through the anger and come out the other side. Vivian was still stuck at the beginning. You're here as his advisor, she said quietly. Daniel's eyes softened slightly. Not pity, something closer to understanding. I'm here because he asked, Daniel replied. Vivian looked away for half a second, scanning the room. Her father was laughing with a donor near the stage, completely at ease. Vivian turned back. And you still came, she said. Daniel didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. This event is for his foundation, he said. It's not about you, and it's not about me. Vivian's jaw tightened. The words weren't cruel, but they carried something heavy. They reminded her she wasn't the center of everything. Vivian felt her pride flare. She kept it buried, but it pulsed under her skin. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice further so no one could hear. I fired you today. Daniel's eyes didn't change. I know, Vivian's throat tightened again. You're standing here like it didn't happen. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, It happened. His voice was quiet, but it landed hard. Vivian's fingers tightened around the clutch again. The envelope inside pressed against her palm. Daniel continued, I left my office key on my desk. I cleared my computer. I said goodbye to a few people. I walked out. Vivian felt a small chill crawl up her spine. He said it like he was describing weather. Vivian's voice turned sharper. And yet you're here. Daniel nodded. Yes. Vivian leaned closer. Why? Daniel's gaze stayed steady. Because I told my daughter I'd be home tonight, he said. Vivian went still. The words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. Not because they were emotional. Because they were practical. Because they made sense. He had a life outside her office. He had a schedule that wasn't built around board calls. Vivian felt something twist inside her. She didn't know what it was. She didn't want to name it. Her father returned then, sliding back into place beside Vivian. Everything all right? Elliot asked, looking between them. Vivian forced a smile. Of course. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. Elliot looked pleased. Good, because I want you both to sit with me for dinner. Vivian's stomach tightened. Dad. No, Elliot said gently, cutting her off without raising his voice. Not a debate. Vivian's smile stayed fixed. Daniel didn't react. Just nodded once. Of course, Daniel said. Vivian felt her heartbeat pick up. The three of them moved toward the dining area. Tables dressed in white linen, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, soft candlelight that made everyone look kinder than they were. Vivian sat to her father's right. Daniel sat across from her. The seating felt deliberate. Vivian didn't like that. As the first course arrived, Elliot began talking about the Foundation's next initiative funding educational programs in under-resourced districts. Daniel listened carefully, asking a few questions. Not showing off, just clarifying details. Vivian watched him speak. He was calm, direct, respectful. But he didn't flatter her father. He challenged small points, gently, as if he trusted Elliot enough to do it. And Elliot listened. Vivian couldn't remember the last time she'd seen her father listen like that to anyone. Elliot lifted his glass at one point. To Daniel, he said, a man who understands what leadership actually is. The people at the table nodded, murmuring agreement. Vivian's fingers tightened around her fork. Elliot looked at her then, smiling. You know, Vivian, he said, I've told Daniel about you, about your drive. Vivian's smile held, but her stomach dropped. Daniel's eyes stayed on her. Elliot continued, I told him you have my discipline, but I also told him something else. Vivian's pulse studded. What? She asked carefully. Elliot's smile softened. That you don't yet know what matters. Vivian felt her face stiffen. The words were spoken casually, almost affectionately, but they landed like a slap. She didn't respond. The conversation moved on, but Vivian barely heard it. Her ears rang faintly. The clink of cutlery sounded too loud. Across the table, Daniel sat quietly, letting Elliot speak. Vivian watched him drink water, not wine. She noticed he didn't touch his phone once. She noticed how he listened when other people spoke, even when they were boring. He wasn't performing. That was the problem. Most people at events like this were performing. Vivian included. Daniel wasn't. Elliot leaned toward Vivian slightly, lowering his voice. I heard you let him go today, he said. Vivian's spine stiffened. So he did know. She kept her expression neutral. Yes, she said. Elliot didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised either. He only said, and you felt nothing? Vivian's fingers tightened again around the fork. Her knuckles whitened. It was necessary, she said. Elliot studied her for a long moment. His eyes weren't cold. They were disappointed in a quiet way that felt worse. Daniel sat across from them, pretending not to listen, but Vivian knew he heard. Elliot leaned back, exhaling slowly. I used to talk like that, he said. Vivian's jaw tightened. And you stopped. Elliot's gaze stayed on her. I learned, he said, eventually. Vivian's chest felt tight. Daniel lifted his eyes briefly, meeting Vivian's gaze, and for a moment she saw it, not triumph, not satisfaction, just the knowledge that she had made a mistake that couldn't be undone, and that her father had known she would. Dinner stretched longer than Vivian expected. Course after course arrived. Plates replaced plates. Conversations shifted from philanthropy to market forecasts to politics. People laughed too loudly at stories that weren't funny. Vivian answered questions when they came her way, spoke about expansion into Singapore, about projected revenue, about discipline and efficiency. She heard her own voice moving smoothly through the room. Across the table, Daniel listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was never about himself. He asked about the foundation's mentorship programs, about how funds were distributed, about long-term oversight. Her father responded thoughtfully, not defensively. Vivian noticed that. At one point, Elliot leaned back in his chair and looked at Daniel with something close to pride. You know what I value most? Elliot said. Daniel shook his head slightly. Consistency, Elliot continued. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that shows up the same way at work and at home. Vivian felt her throat tighten. Daniel didn't react visibly. He only said, That's rare. Elliot nodded. It is. Vivian kept her gaze on her plate. The envelope inside her clutch felt heavier now. She could almost feel the indentation of Daniel's handwriting through the paper. After dessert, the guests began to stand. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. People exchanged cards, promises, handshakes. Elliot placed a hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder. Walk with me, he said. They stepped a few feet away, near the tall windows overlooking the city. Vivian remained at the table. She watched them from a distance. Her father spoke first. Daniel listened, hands loosely folded in front of him. At one point, Daniel nodded. Then he spoke. Elliot's expression shifted, less confident, more reflective. Vivian couldn't hear the words. She didn't like not hearing them. After a minute, Elliot looked toward her. Their eyes met. He gestured lightly, asking her to join. Vivian stood. Her heels felt louder than usual against the marble floor. When she reached them, Elliot didn't smile. He looked at her directly. Tell me, he said, why you let him go. The room was still full of people, but it felt like they were alone. Vivian kept her posture straight. He missed a mandatory executive meeting, she said, without proper approval. Elliot nodded slowly. And that's unacceptable. Elliot waited. Vivian felt heat rise under her skin. He's in a leadership role, she continued. If I allow that, others will assume rules bend. Daniel's eyes stayed on her. Calm, not defensive. Elliot folded his arms loosely. Did the company suffer irreversible damage? He asked. Vivian hesitated. No. Did investors withdraw? No. Did the meeting collapse? Vivian swallowed. There were delays. Elliot's gaze didn't move. Delays, he repeated. The word sounded smaller when he said it. Vivian felt something tighten in her chest again. It's about principle, she said, more firmly. Elliot's eyes softened, but not kindly. Principle, he echoed. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, as if uncomfortable standing between them. Elliot looked at him briefly. Daniel, when you missed that meeting, Elliot asked, what were you doing? Daniel answered without hesitation. My daughter received a science award, he said. She's been working on the project for months. Elliot nodded. And you chose to attend? Yes. Vivian's jaw tightened. Elliot looked back at her. And that required termination? Vivian felt something sharp flicker inside her. He broke protocol. Daniel spoke gently. I did. Vivian's eyes flicked toward him. There was no argument in his voice, no attempt to minimize it. Elliot studied her face carefully. Vivian, he said quietly, do you remember the night of your debate final in high school? The question caught her off guard. Yes, she said slowly. Elliot's voice lowered. I wasn't there. Vivian felt the air shift. The ballroom noise seemed to fade. I had a merger negotiation, Elliot continued. I told you I'd try to make it. Vivian's throat tightened unexpectedly. You didn't make it, she said. Elliot nodded once. I told myself it was necessary. That you'd understand one day. Vivian's chest felt heavy. I did understand, she said quickly. Elliot's eyes held hers. Did you? The question hung there. Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it again. She remembered standing on that stage at 17, scanning the crowd, seeing her mother, not seeing her father. She had told herself it was fine. She had told herself it meant he trusted her to handle it alone. She had told herself she would be stronger because of it. Daniel stood quietly beside them. Elliot continued, his voice calm. I built everything I have on discipline, he said. On showing up. On never missing a meeting. Vivian nodded faintly. But I miss things that can't be rescheduled, he added. Vivian felt her eyes sting slightly. She blinked once, steadying herself. This is different, she said. We're talking about a company. Elliot tilted his head. And what do you think a company is? Vivian frowned slightly. An institution, she replied. Elliot shook his head gently. It's people. The words settled heavily between them. Daniel spoke quietly then. I didn't expect special treatment, he said. I knew the risk. Vivian's gaze snapped toward him. Then why do you look so calm? She asked before she could stop herself. Daniel held her eyes. Because I made the choice on purpose, he said. Vivian felt something inside her recoil. You don't regret it, she said. He shook his head once. No. Elliot exhaled slowly. In Turkey, he said almost to himself. That's what I told you about. Vivian felt cornered in a way she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't used to being questioned. Not like this. Not without anger. Not without shouting. This was worse. This was quiet. Daniel glanced at his watch subtly. I should go, he said. My daughter's waiting. Elliot nodded. Of course. Daniel turned toward Vivian. There was a brief pause. I meant what I said earlier, he told her softly. I don't regret going. Vivian's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Daniel added, but I did respect working for you. The words caught her off guard. Past tense. Respected. Before she could respond, he gave a small nod to Elliot. Good night, sir. Then he walked away. No rush, no hesitation. Just steady steps toward the exit. Vivian watched him leave the ballroom. This time, it felt different from the office. In the office, she had been the one standing still while he walked out. Here, she felt like the one left behind. Elliot didn't speak immediately. He stood beside her, hands resting lightly at his sides. Finally, he said, strength isn't about control. Vivian stared at the doors Daniel had just passed through. It's about judgment. She didn't respond. Elliot continued, You've inherited my discipline, but you don't have to inherit my mistakes. Vivian's throat felt tight again. She hated that she couldn't argue cleanly. She hated that part of her knew he wasn't wrong. I can't reverse it, she said quietly. Elliot looked at her. No, he agreed. You can't. The words felt final. Vivian's chest ached slightly. For a brief moment she considered calling Daniel back, saying something, offering something. But she didn't move. Pride held her in place. Or fear. She wasn't sure which. Elliot placed a hand on her shoulder gently. You should ask yourself why his absence bothered you so much, he said. Vivian's eyes lifted to meet his. It wasn't personal. Elliot gave a faint, knowing look. Everything is personal, he said. He stepped away then, greeting another guest who approached. Vivian stood alone near the window. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky. She could see her reflection faintly in the glass. For the first time in a long while, she didn't look certain. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the envelope. She unfolded the note again. Keep taking care of each other. Her grip tightened slightly. She thought of the operations team, Of Erin's email, of how quickly she had typed no delays tolerated. She thought of the 17-year-old girl scanning an auditorium for her father. She thought of Daniel walking toward his daughter tonight. Her jaw tightened. She hated that this was following her home. Hated that it wouldn't dissolve with sleep. The ballroom noise swelled again behind her. Vivian folded the note carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and for the first time in years, she felt unsure of her own definition of success. Vivian didn't sleep much that night. She lay in her apartment with the curtains open, the city lights washing the ceiling in pale movement, cars passing far below, distant sirens, the soft hum of a place that never fully shut down. She kept hearing her father's voice. Everything is personal. She kept seeing Daniel's face, not when she fired him, not even on the stage, the moment in between. When he stood across from her at the table, listening while people praised him, and he didn't take it in like a reward. He took it like responsibility. That was what bothered her. It wasn't fair. Vivian turned over once. Then again, at 3:12 a.m., she got up. No robe, no slippers, just bare feet on cold floor. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself water, then stood there holding the glass, staring at nothing. The water tasted metallic. She didn't finish it. Her phone sat on the counter. She stared at it longer than she wanted to admit. Then she picked it up. She opened her email. The operations thread was still there, waiting. Erin had responded again. Ms. Hart, we've handled immediate coverage. However, Daniel's departure leaves a gap in the supplier renegotiation process. He was the only one with direct rapport with Madsen Logistics. Their renewal deadline is next week. Vivian's jaw tightened. Madsen Logistics. She knew the contract. Everyone knew it. They were the backbone of their distribution system. They were the reason Hart Consolidated could deliver faster than competitors. Vivian typed back immediately. Schedule a call with Madsen. I'll handle it. She hit send. Then she realized her hands were shaking slightly. Not fear. Anger. Or maybe frustration. Because the company didn't need Daniel's feelings. It needed his knowledge, and she had cut him out in one morning. Vivian set the phone down. She didn't go back to bed. Instead, she showered, dressed, left the apartment before sunrise. The lobby staff at her building greeted her. She nodded without slowing. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting her cheeks. Her breath came out in short white clouds. The car ride to the office was quiet. The driver asked if she wanted music. Vivian said no. She watched the streets go by. Empty sidewalks. Delivery trucks. A few people waiting for buses with their hands shoved into their pockets. Normal lives. Lives that didn't revolve around investor calls. When she arrived at the building, the lobby was almost empty. Security nodded. The front desk staff looked surprised to see her this early. Vivian didn't acknowledge it. She took the elevator up alone. The doors opened to her floor. The corridor lights were dim. The air smelled faintly of cleaning solution. Mara's desk was empty. Vivian walked into her office and turned on the lamp near her desk instead of the overhead lights. The soft glow felt less harsh. She sat down. For a moment she just sat there, staring at the clean surface of the desk. Then she opened her laptop. Her inbox was already filling. One message stood out. From her father. Come by my office this morning. 9 Tuz. No greeting. No explanation. Vivian stared at the message, then closed the laptop. Her father didn't request meetings unless he meant something. And last night, he hadn't sounded angry. He'd sounded tired. That worried her more. At 8:15, Mara arrived. She paused at the doorway, surprised to see Vivian already there. You're early, Mara said carefully. Vivian didn't look up. So are you. Mara stepped inside, placing her bag down quietly. There was a brief hesitation. Is everything okay? Mara asked. Vivian's fingers paused on the keyboard. Yes, she said. It wasn't convincing. Mara didn't push. She never did. Instead, she said, Your schedule starts at 10. But Mr. Hart's office called. He confirmed 9. Vivian nodded. I know. Mara glanced at Vivian's desk, then at Vivian's face. Her eyes lingered for a second, like she was seeing something she hadn't seen before, then she looked away. "I'll have coffee brought up," Mara said. Vivian didn't answer. At 8:52, Vivian stood. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed the sleeves, straightened her collar. All automatic, armor. She left her office and walked toward the private elevator that connected to the executive level. The ride up was silent. When the doors opened, Elliot Hart's floor looked different from hers. Less modern. More wood. More warmth. Like a place designed to remind people of history. His assistant greeted her politely. "He's waiting for you." Vivian nodded once and walked to the double doors. She knocked lightly. "Come in," Elliot called. Vivian stepped inside. Her father's office was larger than hers, but it felt less sharp. The furniture was older, heavy mahogany, shelves lined with books he probably didn't read anymore, but kept because they looked like proof. Elliot stood near the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled slightly. He looked older than he had last night. Not in a dramatic way, just real. Vivian stopped a few feet from his desk. "You wanted to see me," she said. Elliot turned, studying her face. "Yes." He set the coffee down. There was a long pause. Vivian hated pauses with her father. They always felt like a test. Finally, Elliot said, "Sit." Vivian sat in the chair across from him. Elliot didn't sit immediately. He walked behind his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the desk between them. Vivian's eyes dropped to it. The label read, "D. Brooks." Her stomach tightened. Elliot leaned back against the desk. "You know what this is?" he asked. Vivian's voice stayed controlled. "His file." Elliot nodded. "Yes, his file, the real one." Vivian's gaze sharpened. "The real one?" Elliot opened the folder. Inside were documents Vivian hadn't seen before. Reports, notes, handwritten pages. She recognized her father's handwriting. Vivian's chest tightened. Elliot tapped the first page with his finger. "Daniel started consulting for me because I asked him to," he said. "Not because he came looking for power." Vivian didn't respond. Elliot continued. "Do you know why I asked him?" Vivian's voice came out colder than she intended. "Because he's good at operations." Elliot shook his head slightly. "No." He slid one sheet across the desk. Vivian glanced down at it. It was a list, a timeline. Dates, notes, short summaries. Elliot's handwriting. Supplier dispute resolved. No legal escalation. Union negotiation. Prevented strike. Warehouse safety incident. Handled quietly. No injuries. New hire retention plan. Reduced turnover 18%. Vivian stared at the page. These weren't small things. Some of them she didn't even know had happened. Her throat tightened. "Why wasn't I informed?" she asked. Elliot's eyes stayed on her. "Because you don't listen," he said. The words weren't loud, but they landed hard. Vivian's jaw tightened. "I listen," she said. Elliot tilted his head slightly. "You hear numbers, you hear deadlines, you hear results, but you don't listen to people." Vivian felt heat rise behind her ribs. "That's not fair." Elliot's expression didn't change. "It's accurate." Vivian's fingers curled slightly in her lap. She didn't know what to say. Anger wanted to rise. Defense wanted to rise. But something in her father's face stopped it. He looked disappointed. Not in a theatrical way, like a man who had been watching something go wrong for a long time and finally decided to speak. Elliot leaned forward slightly. "Daniel is the kind of man who makes a company stable," he said. "Not flashy, not ambitious. Stable." Vivian's voice came out quieter. "He missed a mandatory meeting." Elliot nodded. "Yes, and you punished him like he committed betrayal." Vivian swallowed. Elliot's gaze sharpened. "You didn't fire him because he missed a meeting," he said. "You fired him because he reminded you of something you don't want to face." Vivian felt her throat tighten again. She looked away, briefly, toward the window. The city stretched below them. What are you talking about? She asked. Elliot sighed. You were there when your mother died, he said. Vivian went still. Her fingers stopped moving. The air in the office felt heavier. Elliot continued, his voice quiet. You watched her choose work over rest, over health, over everything, and you watched what it did to her. Vivian's stomach turned. She hated that he said it so plainly. She hated that he said it at all. That has nothing to do with this, Vivian said. Elliot's eyes held hers. It has everything to do with this. Vivian felt her chest tighten like something was pressing inward. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, not sick, not dying, just sitting at the kitchen table late at night with papers spread out, hair pinned back, eyes tired, saying, just one more thing, Biddy. Vivian swallowed. Elliot leaned back, voice still calm. You think if you stop, you'll lose everything, he said. Vivian didn't answer. Because he wasn't wrong. Elliot opened the folder again and pulled out another sheet. A handwritten note. He slid it across to her. Vivian looked down. It was Daniel's writing. A short paragraph. Neat. Controlled. She read it once, then again. Mr. Hart, if Vivian ever asks why I stayed so long, tell her I believed in the company. I believed in what it could be if it stopped eating its own people. Vivian's throat tightened sharply. She stared at the paper until the words blurred. Elliot watched her carefully. He wrote that 3 months ago, Elliot said. Vivian's voice came out strained. He knew. Elliot nodded. He knew who you were becoming. Vivian's fingers tightened around the paper. She felt her pulse in her fingertips. Her voice came out low. Why didn't you tell me? Elliot didn't answer right away. Then he said, because you wouldn't have heard it. Vivian stared down at the note. The phrase, eating its own people, stuck in her mind like something bitter. She thought of the operations floor, the late nights, the constant pressure, people working until they looked hollow. She had always called it excellence. Now it sounded like something else. Vivian slowly set the paper down. Her hands felt cold. Elliot spoke again, quieter. You can build an empire and still lose what matters, he said. Vivian's jaw tightened. And what matters? She asked, almost challenging him. Elliot's eyes didn't waver. Whether anyone can stand beside you without being afraid. Vivian felt something shift in her chest. Not a collapse, a fracture. She looked at her father. He looked tired, but he looked honest. Vivian swallowed. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Elliot exhaled slowly. Because you crossed a line yesterday, he said, and I don't want you to become me. Vivian's throat tightened again. She looked down at Daniel's note. Then she said very quietly, I didn't mean to. Elliot nodded once. That's what scares me, he said. Vivian stayed in her father's office longer than she expected. Not because the conversation continued. It didn't. Elliot Hart stopped speaking after that last sentence, like he'd said what he came to say and didn't trust himself to keep going. He walked back toward the window and stared out at the city. His hands were in his pockets. His shoulders looked heavier than they had at the gala. Vivian sat across from him with Daniel's note still in front of her. The paper looked ordinary, like something that should have been thrown away after reading. But it felt like evidence, not of Daniel's character, of hers. Vivian cleared her throat once. Her voice came out careful. What exactly is he doing for you? Elliot didn't turn around right away. He keeps me honest, he said. Vivian's jaw tightened. That's not a job title. Elliot's mouth twitched slightly, not quite a smile. It's the only one I needed. Vivian looked down at the folder again. Her eyes traced the dates and notes. Problems solved quietly. Fires put out before anyone noticed. She had never thanked him for any of it. She had never even known. Vivian felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not guilt, something closer to realization. She looked up. Did you know I was going to fire him? Elliot turned then, slowly. His expression didn't soften. I suspected, he said. Vivian's throat tightened. And you let me. Elliot nodded once. Yes. Vivian's voice sharpened. Why? Elliot held her gaze. Because if I stopped you, he said, you would have blamed me. You would have called it interference. You would have convinced yourself you were right anyway. Vivian felt heat rise under her skin. That's not true. Elliot didn't argue. He just looked at her like he'd seen the truth already. Vivian's hands clenched slightly in her lap. After a moment she said, quieter. So, this was a lesson. Elliot's eyes narrowed. No, he said, it was your choice. The words sat between them. Vivian hated them because they were clean. They left her nowhere to hide. She looked down again at Daniel's note. If Vivian ever asks why I stayed so long, her fingers brushed the edge of the paper. She realized Daniel had anticipated her curiosity, anticipated her regret. That meant he had understood her better than she had understood him. Vivian's throat tightened. He thinks the company eats its own people, she said. Elliot nodded. It does, he replied. You just don't feel it from where you sit. Vivian's jaw clenched. I worked to sit here. Elliot's gaze stayed steady. I know, he said. So did I. The silence stretched. Vivian swallowed. Do you still want him advising you? She asked. Elliot didn't answer immediately. Then he said, yes. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. You're not concerned about optics, she asked. If people find out you're relying on someone, I terminate it. Elliot cut her off with a small shake of his head. I'm concerned about results, he said, and I'm concerned about the kind of company we leave behind. Vivian stared at him. The words hit her differently than they would have yesterday, because she could picture Daniel's face when he spoke about his daughter. Not dramatic, not sentimental, just certain. Vivian's voice came out lower. He won't come back, she said. Elliot's eyes narrowed slightly. That depends, he said. Vivian looked up quickly. On what? Elliot stepped away from the window and walked toward his desk. He sat down slowly, as if his body felt older today. On whether you can admit you were wrong, he said. Vivian's mouth tightened. I don't need to admit anything, she said automatically. The words came out before she could stop them. Elliot's gaze didn't flinch. Vivian felt her face warm. She exhaled through her nose. Then she said, quieter, I don't know how. Elliot's expression shifted slightly. Not soft, just less sharp. You do, he said. You just don't want to. Vivian looked down. Her hands were still clenched. She forced them open. The gesture felt small, but it was the first time that morning she noticed how tense her body had been. Elliot leaned forward slightly. You're not a monster, he said. You're my daughter, and you're capable. But capability without restraint turns into something ugly. Vivian swallowed hard. Her voice came out almost flat. He should have told me, she said. He should have told me about your arrangement. Elliot nodded. Yes, he said. Maybe. Vivian's eyes narrowed, and he didn't. Elliot's voice stayed calm. No. Vivian leaned back slightly, trying to regain control. Then he wanted this, she said. He wanted to embarrass me. Elliot's eyes sharpened again. Stop, he said. The syllable word was quiet, but it carried weight. Vivian's chest tightened. Elliot continued. You're searching for a reason to make him the villain so you don't have to look at yourself. Vivian felt the words strike deep. She looked away quickly. The room felt too warm now, like the air had thickened. She stood abruptly. I have work, she said. Elliot didn't move. I know, he replied. Vivian grabbed the folder before she could think. Elliot's gaze snapped to it. That stays here, he said. Vivian froze. Her fingers tightened on the folder's edge. Elliot stood up slowly. That is not your property, he said, and you don't get to control him now just because you feel uncomfortable. Vivian's jaw tightened. She set the folder down carefully, like it might break. Elliot watched her. Then he said, quieter, if you want to fix this, you don't do it through authority. You do it through humility. Vivian's chest tightened. Humility. The word felt foreign in her mouth, like something she'd never been asked to use. Vivian turned toward the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. Without looking back, she asked, "Is he still here?" Elliot's voice came after a beat. "He has an office on the 15th floor," he said. "Temporary. He's been using it for months." Vivian felt her stomach drop. 15th floor. That was inside her building. Inside her space. She had passed that floor 100 times. She didn't say anything. She opened the door and walked out. The hallway outside felt colder than her father's office. Vivian walked toward the elevator. Her heels sounded sharper now. When the elevator doors closed, she stared at her reflection again. The same suit, the same hair, the same controlled face. But her eyes looked different. Not softer, just unsettled. She pressed the button for the 15th floor before she could stop herself. The elevator descended smoothly. Her pulse thudded harder with each passing number. 20, 19, 18. 18. She didn't know what she planned to do when she got there. She told herself she just wanted to see him, just confirm what her father said, but she knew that wasn't true. She wanted something else. She wanted to feel less exposed. The doors opened at 15. The floor was quieter than hers. Fewer glass offices, more open workspaces. The kind of floor where actual work happened. Vivian stepped out. A few employees glanced up, surprised. They weren't used to seeing her here. She walked forward without hesitation, as if she belonged, as if she owned the air. A receptionist stood up quickly. "Ms. Hart," Vivian held up a hand. "Where is Daniel Brooks' office?" she asked. The receptionist blinked, startled. "He's down the hall," she said. "Second door on the right." Vivian nodded and walked past. Her heartbeat felt heavy in her chest. She reached the door. The nameplate was temporary. Printed paper under clear plastic. D. Brooks. Vivian stared at it for a second. Then she knocked once. A pause. Then Daniel's voice. "Come in." Vivian opened the door. Daniel was sitting at a small desk, sleeves rolled up, reading a report. He looked up calmly, as if he'd been expecting her. His eyes met hers. There was no smile, no fear, no surprise, just quiet attention. Vivian stood in the doorway, her hand still on the handle. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "Ms. Hart," he said. Vivian swallowed. For a moment, her voice didn't come. Then she managed, "I didn't know you were still in the building." Daniel nodded. "I assumed you didn't," he said. Vivian's jaw tightened. The same sentence again. It felt like he was holding up the truth and making her look at it. Vivian stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The click sounded louder than it should have. Daniel watched her. Vivian stood there realizing she had no script, no policy, no clean decision to hide behind, just her and him, and the thing she'd done. Daniel's voice stayed calm. "Are you here to escort me out?" he asked. Vivian's throat tightened. "No," she said. Daniel waited. Vivian's hands clenched, then released. Her voice came out lower. "I came because my father told me you've been advising him." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." Vivian stared at him. Then she said very quietly, "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Because you weren't asking the right questions." Vivian felt her chest tighten. She didn't know how to respond. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I'm not angry with you," he said. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "It's supposed to be the truth." Vivian stood still, her breath shallow. She didn't know what to do with someone who refused to hate her. It would have been easier if he did. Vivian didn't sit. The chair across from Daniel's desk was empty, waiting, but she stayed standing as if the floor beneath her might shift if she lowered herself. Daniel didn't offer again. He didn't move to make her comfortable. He just watched her, patient, like he'd learned how to wait out storms. The office was small, temporary, a printer in the corner, A single framed photo on the desk turned slightly away from her. Vivian tried not to look at it. She failed. A little girl with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile holding a blue ribbon, standing beside Daniel, who looked different there, lighter, less weighed down. Like the man in the photo still believed in things. Vivian's throat tightened. Daniel noticed her glance. "That was yesterday," he said. Vivian's eyes snapped back to him. "Yesterday," she repeated. Daniel nodded. "After school." The words landed quietly. No accusation. Just fact. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. She pictured him leaving the building after she fired him, walking straight into that moment anyway. She looked away, jaw clenched. Daniel leaned back slightly. "You didn't come here to talk about my job," he said. Vivian's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I didn't come here to talk about your daughter either." Daniel didn't react. He only said, "Then why are you here?" Vivian stared at him. Her mind searched for the version of herself that handled conflict cleanly. The one who could turn a conversation into a negotiation. But this didn't feel like business. This felt like standing too close to a wound. Vivian exhaled slowly. "My father said you wrote something," she said. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. "I've written a lot of things." Vivian's throat tightened. She hated that she sounded like she was asking for permission. She forced the words out anyway. "He said you wrote about me." Daniel didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said. Vivian felt her pulse in her fingertips again. "What did you mean," she asked, "when you said the company was eating its own people?" Daniel's gaze held hers for a moment. Then he looked down at the report on his desk. Not to avoid her, but to slow himself, like he didn't want to say the wrong thing. Finally, he said, "I meant what I wrote." Vivian's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Daniel's eyes lifted again. "It's the only answer," he said. Vivian felt anger rise. A familiar place. A place she could operate from. "You think I enjoy pushing people?" she asked. "You think I like being the one making decisions everyone hates?" Daniel's face didn't change. "I don't think you enjoy it," he said. "I think you're used to it." Vivian's throat tightened. The words struck harder than anger would have. Used to it, like she had become something without noticing. Vivian stepped forward slightly, her heels soft on the carpet. "You didn't have to embarrass me at the gala," she said. Daniel blinked. "I didn't," he replied. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You stood there while my father praised you." Daniel's voice stayed calm. "Should I have refused?" Vivian hesitated. Daniel continued. "He invited me. He asked me to be there. That wasn't about you." Vivian clenched her jaw. It still felt like it was. Everything felt like it was. Vivian's voice lowered. "You could have told him what I did." Daniel studied her for a moment. "I didn't," he said. Vivian's gaze sharpened. "You didn't tell him?" Daniel shook his head. "Not before last night." Vivian felt her stomach drop. "So he found out at the table," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. Vivian's throat tightened again. Her father had looked at her with disappointment. Not rage, not shock, just disappointment. And Daniel had sat there and let it happen. Vivian didn't know whether to hate him for that or respect him for it. She looked at the desk again. The photo. The ribbon. Her voice came out quieter. "What happens now?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the desk. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. Vivian's mouth tightened. She didn't like questions turned back on her. "I don't know," she admitted. The words came out before she could stop them. Silence settled. Daniel's eyes stayed on her. "You fired me," he said. "That happened. You can't pretend it didn't." Vivian swallowed. "I'm not pretending," she said. Daniel nodded once. "Good." Vivian's hands clenched at her sides. "I did what I thought was right," she said. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "That's what people say when they don't want to say they were afraid." Vivian's chest tightened sharply. She felt it like a physical hit. Afraid. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Daniel continued, not cruel, not loud. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of looking weak. Afraid of becoming irrelevant. Afraid that if you let one person step out of line, everything collapses. Vivian's jaw clenched. That's leadership, she said. Daniel shook his head slightly. No, he said. That's panic dressed up as leadership. Vivian stared at him. Her eyes burned slightly. She blinked once, hard. You don't know anything about me, she said. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. I know you were in your office at 6 in the morning, he said. Because I've seen your light on before the cleaners even leave. Vivian's throat tightened. I know you don't eat lunch, he continued, because I've seen Mara throw away untouched trays. Vivian's fingers curled tighter. Daniel's voice stayed calm. And I know you don't go home until your floor is empty, he said, because you don't want anyone to think you're less committed than they are. Vivian's chest tightened so hard, it almost hurt. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't, because it was true. She had always told herself she was setting the standard, but maybe she was just setting a trap. Vivian's voice came out rougher. So what? She said. I work harder than everyone else. That's why I'm here. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, he said. And that's why you're alone. The words hung in the air. Vivian felt her throat close. She swallowed, but it didn't help. Daniel leaned back again, letting the silence sit, not rushing to soften it, not trying to fix what he'd said. Vivian stared at the carpet. She thought of the people on her floor, how they straightened when she walked by, how conversations stopped when she entered a room, how no one ever laughed around her unless she laughed first. She had always assumed it was respect. Now she wasn't sure. Vivian's voice came out very quiet. Did they like you? She asked. Daniel looked at her. They trusted me, he said. Vivian's throat tightened. That felt worse than like. Trust meant they believed he wouldn't sacrifice them. Vivian's fingers trembled slightly. She forced them still. And you think, I don't have that, she said. Daniel's gaze held hers. I think you could, he replied. But you don't know how to earn it. Vivian's jaw tightened again. And you do? She asked. Daniel's eyes shifted briefly toward the photo, then back to her. I go home, he said. The simplicity of it made her stomach twist. Vivian looked away again. Her voice came out low, almost strained. You didn't answer my question. Daniel waited. What happens now? She repeated. Daniel exhaled slowly. I go back to my life, he said, and you keep running your company. Vivian's chest tightened. That's it? She asked. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. That's what you chose, he said. Vivian stared at him. She hated that he wasn't begging. She hated that he wasn't bargaining. She hated that he wasn't trying to climb back into the place she'd thrown him out of, because it meant she couldn't control the outcome anymore. Vivian swallowed. Her voice came out quiet. I made a mistake, she said. The words felt unfamiliar in her mouth, like speaking in a language she didn't know. Daniel didn't react. He only looked at her. Vivian's hands clenched again. I shouldn't have fired you, she said. Silence. Daniel's face stayed calm, but something in his eyes shifted. Not satisfaction, not relief, something heavier, like he was hearing a door open, but he didn't trust it. Vivian forced herself to keep going. I didn't know you had that kind of relationship with my father, she said, and I didn't know what you were doing for the company. Daniel's gaze hardened slightly. That's not why it was wrong, he said. Vivian froze. The correction hit her hard. Because he was right. She wasn't sorry because she lost a valuable employee. She was sorry because she had punished a man for showing up for his child. Vivian's throat tightened again. She stared at him. Then she said, quieter, you're right. The words came out thin. Daniel nodded once. Now you understand, he said. Vivian's jaw tightened. She hated how much it cost to say those words. Daniel leaned forward again. Tell me something, he said. Vivian's eyes narrowed. What? Daniel's voice stayed quiet. If you had a daughter, he asked, would you want her to become you? Vivian went still. Her breath caught. She didn't answer. Because the answer came too fast. And she didn't like it. Vivian's fingers curled into her palm until her nails pressed skin. Daniel waited. Vivian's throat tightened, then she whispered, no. Daniel nodded slowly. Then start there, he said. Vivian stared at him, her chest tight, her mind racing. She didn't know what start there meant in practice. She didn't know how to change without losing the things she'd built her entire identity around. But she knew one thing. She couldn't unhear the question. She couldn't pretend it didn't land. Vivian turned slightly toward the door. She stopped halfway. Her voice came out quiet. What would you have done, she asked, if you were me? Daniel's eyes stayed on her. I wouldn't have fired me, he said. Vivian's mouth tightened. That's not an answer. Daniel's gaze didn't soften. It is, he said, because it means I would have asked why I missed the meeting before I decided what kind of man I was. Vivian felt something sink inside her. She nodded faintly, almost against her will. Then she opened the door and stepped out. The hallway felt colder than before. The air felt sharp in her lungs. As she walked back toward the elevator, she realized her hands were shaking again. Not anger this time. Something else. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Vivian didn't go back to her office. Not immediately. When the elevator doors opened on her floor, she stepped out, then stopped. The corridor stretched ahead, glass walls, muted carpets, quiet efficiency. People noticed her. They always did. Conversations softened. Screens shifted. A few employees straightened instinctively. She stood there longer than usual, watching, really watching. Aaron was at the far end of the open space, speaking quietly with two analysts. One of them looked tired. Dark circles, shoulders slightly hunched. Coffee cup clutched like something essential. Vivian had seen that look 100 times. She had worn it herself. Aaron glanced up and saw her. His posture stiffened. The analyst stepped back slightly, like students caught mid-conversation. Vivian walked toward them. Each step felt deliberate. Aaron cleared his throat. Ms. Hart. Vivian stopped in front of them. What are you working on? She asked. Aaron answered quickly. Supplier contingency models. Since Mr. Brooks left. The slight correction didn't escape her. Vivian nodded. Is there an issue? Aaron hesitated. The hesitation was small, but it was there. Vivian noticed the analyst looking at him instead of her, waiting to see what he would say. Finally, Aaron replied, We're managing. Not confident, not smooth, managing. Vivian felt the weight of that word. She looked at the analyst with the dark circles. What's your name? She asked. The young man blinked. Ethan. How long have you been here, Ethan? 4 months. Vivian studied his face. Are you sleeping? She asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. Aaron looked startled. Ethan swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Vivian held his gaze. He looked away first. Vivian felt something tighten in her chest. Go home at a reasonable hour tonight, she said. Aaron blinked. Ms. Hart, the models. They'll still be there in the morning, Vivian said. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft either. Aaron stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Vivian felt her pulse thud. She turned away before the moment stretched too long. As she walked back toward her office, she heard a faint murmur behind her. Not loud enough to catch words. She didn't turn around. Inside her office, she closed the door slowly. The silence hit her again. Her desk looked exactly as she'd left it. Clean, controlled, predictable. Vivian walked to the window. The city looked the same, but something inside her felt off balance. She thought about Daniel's question. If you had a daughter, would you want her to become you? Her stomach tightened again. She imagined a girl at 17, standing on a stage, scanning a crowd. Would she want that girl to believe success meant never leaving a meeting? Vivian's jaw tightened. Her phone buzzed. A calendar notification. Call with Madsen Logistics. 40,000 p.m. She glanced at the time. 3:42. Vivian returned to her desk and sat down. She opened the contract file. Daniel's notes were still embedded in the margins. Comments about pricing leverage. Warnings about relationship strain. A line highlighted in yellow. Trust built over time. Don't push too hard at renewal. Vivian stared at that sentence. Don't push too hard. That wasn't her style. She pushed until things moved. But Madsen hadn't broken in 7 years, because Daniel handled them. Vivian leaned back in her chair. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could run the call alone. She could assert dominance, tighten margins. That's what she would have done yesterday. But yesterday felt far away. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her father. How did it go? Vivian stared at it. She typed back, I spoke to him. 3 dots appeared. And? Vivian's fingers paused. She didn't know how to summarize it. Finally, she wrote, I'm not sure who I've been building this for. The response took longer this time. Then, that's a start. Vivian set the phone down. At exactly 4 line the dump, Madsen Logistics, a voice answered. Thomas speaking? Vivian inhaled slowly. Thomas, this is Vivian Hart. A brief pause. Ms. Hart, Thomas replied, polite but cautious. I wasn't expecting you. I imagine you weren't, she said. Another pause. Where is Daniel? Thomas asked. The directness of it made her stomach tighten. He's no longer with the company, Vivian said. Silence. It stretched longer than comfortable. Finally, Thomas said, I see. Vivian heard the shift, subtle, but clear. She could push now. Demand renewal terms. Assert authority. Instead, she said, I wanted to speak with you personally. Thomas didn't respond right away. Vivian continued, carefully, Daniel built this partnership. I understand that. A small breath on the other end. Yes, Thomas said. Vivian swallowed. And I intend to honor that. The words felt strange in her mouth. Thomas was quiet. Then he said, Daniel was different. Vivian felt the truth of that settle heavily. In what way? She asked. He listened, Thomas replied. He understood when to push and when to step back. Vivian's jaw tightened slightly. I see, she said. Thomas continued. We renewed because we trusted him. The word again. Trusted. Vivian closed her eyes briefly. Then I'll have to earn that, she said. The silence that followed was different. Not tense. Measuring. Thomas exhaled slowly. That would be wise, he said. The call lasted 32 minutes. Vivian didn't dominate it. She didn't threaten. She asked questions, clarified concerns, left room in the margins. When it ended, there was no final agreement, but there was no fracture either. Vivian sat back in her chair and stared at the dark screen. Her heart was beating slower now. She hadn't lost anything, but she hadn't won either. For the first time, she realized those weren't the only 2 outcomes. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Aaron. Madsen call complete? Vivian typed back. Yes. We'll review terms tomorrow. Go home. A pause. Then, yes, ma'am. Vivian stared at the ellipsis. She wondered what tone he heard in her messages. Cold. Impatient. Demanding. She set the phone down. The office felt quieter than usual. She stood and walked toward the door. Outside, the floor looked the same. People at desks. Screens glowing. But a few employees glanced up at her differently this time. Not afraid. Just curious. Vivian walked slowly toward the elevators. Halfway there, she stopped. She turned around. Aaron was still at his desk. She walked back toward him. His posture stiffened again. Yes, his posture stiffened again. Hart. Vivian looked at him carefully. How long has Ethan been staying past 9? She asked. Aaron hesitated. Most nights, he admitted. Vivian's jaw tightened. And you? Aaron gave a tight smile. Later. Vivian exhaled slowly. That changes, she said. Erin blinked. Effective immediately, she added. No one stays past 8 without explicit approval. Erin stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Ms. Hart, deadlines will be met, she said. With rested people. Erin swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Vivian held his gaze for a second longer. Then she turned and walked away. This time, when she reached the elevator, she didn't hesitate. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection again. Her face looked the same. But her eyes didn't. They looked less sharp, less rigid, more uncertain. And strangely, that didn't feel like weakness. It felt like something loosening. The elevator descended. Vivian realized she hadn't thought about losing control in the last hour. She had thought about people, about trust, about the difference between fear and respect. The doors opened to the lobby. She stepped out into the evening air. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to stay until the building emptied. She walked to her car while employees were still inside. The sky was turning dark. Her phone buzzed one last time before she got in. A message from her father. Proud of you. Vivian stared at it. Her throat tightened. She didn't respond. She slid into the back seat and closed the door. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the building. It still stood tall, imposing, impressive, but for the first time, she didn't see it as something that required constant defense. She saw it as something fragile, something made of people, and she realized that redefining success wouldn't happen in one conversation. It would happen in small decisions, in letting someone go home, in listening before deciding, in asking why. She leaned back against the seat. The city lights flickered past. Daniel's question stayed with her. Would you want her to become you? Vivian closed her eyes briefly, not to escape it, but to sit with it. Tomorrow, she would go back to the 15th floor, not as a CEO issuing orders, but as a woman learning how to lead without fear, and that felt heavier than any board vote she had ever faced. Vivian returned to the building the next morning without telling anyone she planned to. No email. No message to Mara. No warning to Erin. She arrived early again, but this time it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a habit she didn't know how to stop. The lobby was brighter than it had been yesterday. More movement. More voices. People coming in with coffee, laughing quietly, shrugging off coats. Vivian walked through them like she always did, but something in her chest felt strange. Not guilt. Something closer to awareness. She noticed how quickly people stepped aside when she approached, how they lowered their voices, how they stopped smiling until she passed. She used to like that. It used to feel like control. Now it looked like fear wearing a polite mask. In the elevator, she watched the numbers climb. 15. She pressed it without hesitation. When the doors opened, the floor smelled faintly of burnt coffee and printer paper. Someone had left a box of donuts near the receptionist's desk. Half of them were already gone. The receptionist glanced up and stiffened immediately. Ms. Hart, Vivian raised a hand. Is he in? She asked. The receptionist blinked. Mr. Brooks? Vivian nodded. Yes. The receptionist hesitated, then nodded slowly. He arrived about 10 minutes ago. Vivian didn't respond. She walked down the hall again, the same carpet, the same quiet hum of computers. This time her heartbeat was steady. Not because she felt calm, because she'd already accepted that whatever happened next would be uncomfortable. She stopped in front of Daniel's door. She didn't knock immediately. She stood there for a moment, staring at the paper nameplate. D. Burroughs, temporary, like he didn't belong. Like he could be removed with one hand. Vivian lifted her knuckles and knocked once. A pause. Come in, Daniel's voice said. Vivian opened the door. Daniel was at his desk again, but he wasn't reading a report this time. He was on the phone. His voice was low, steady, speaking to someone with the kind of patience Vivian rarely heard in the building. Yes, he said. I understand. No, I'm not asking you to rush. I'm asking you to be clear. He glanced up and saw her. His voice didn't change. All right, he said into the phone. Call me back after you've spoken to your team. He hung up and leaned back slightly. His eyes met hers. You're early, he said. Vivian stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I needed to speak with you, she replied. Daniel nodded once. About what? Vivian stood in the same spot she had yesterday, but she didn't feel as stiff. She still didn't sit. Daniel didn't offer. The room was quiet except for the faint sound of keyboards outside the door. Vivian swallowed. Her voice came out low. I spoke to Madsen Logistics. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Not suspicious, just attentive. And? He asked. Vivian hesitated. They asked where you were, she said. Daniel didn't react. Vivian continued. They said they trusted you. Daniel nodded slowly. That's true. Vivian's jaw tightened. You make it sound simple. Daniel's gaze stayed on her. It is simple, he said. It's just not easy. Vivian felt her throat tighten. She looked down briefly, then back up. I told them I would honor what you built, she said. Daniel studied her face. And did you mean it? Vivian held his gaze. Yes, she said. Daniel didn't smile, but his shoulders eased slightly, almost imperceptibly. Vivian noticed it anyway. Silence settled again. Vivian forced herself to step forward. She stopped in front of his desk. I'm not here to ask you to come back, she said. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. Good, he replied. Vivian's mouth tightened. That's not what you want. Daniel nodded once. No. Vivian swallowed. I'm here because I need to say something, she said. Daniel waited. Vivian's fingers curled slightly at her sides. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat now. She hated this. She hated that there was no contract language for it, no corporate phrasing that made it safe. Vivian looked at Daniel. I was wrong, she said. The words came out clear this time. No hesitation, no defense. Daniel's eyes held hers. He didn't respond immediately. Vivian's throat tightened. She continued, voice steady but quiet. I fired you because you missed a meeting, she said. But that wasn't the real reason. Daniel's expression didn't change. Vivian forced herself to keep going. I fired you because you made me feel like I was losing control, she admitted. The confession tasted bitter. Daniel blinked slowly. Vivian felt her chest tighten again. I told myself it was discipline, she said. But it wasn't. It was fear. Daniel leaned back slightly. His eyes stayed on her like he was trying to decide whether she meant it. Vivian's voice dropped. I don't know when I started thinking being human was the same thing as being weak. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. He looked away for the first time, just briefly, toward the window. When he looked back, his voice was calm. It happened slowly, he said. Vivian nodded faintly. I didn't see it, she said. Daniel's gaze sharpened slightly. No, he replied. You didn't want to. Vivian swallowed. She didn't argue, because he was right. The silence stretched again. Vivian's hands unclenched slowly. I can't undo what I did, she said. Daniel nodded. No. Vivian's throat tightened. But I want to understand what it cost, she added. Daniel's eyes held hers. His voice came out quiet. It cost my daughter her stability. Vivian felt the words land in her chest like a weight. Daniel continued, still calm. She's 8, he said. She doesn't understand corporate policies. She understands her dad coming home quiet. Vivian's fingers curled into her palm again. She asked me if I did something wrong, Daniel said. Vivian's breath caught. Daniel's gaze didn't leave her. And I told her no, he said. But she didn't believe me. Vivian felt her throat tighten sharply. Her eyes stung. She blinked once. Daniel continued. Because when a child sees their parent punished, they assume the world is fair. They assume the punishment means guilt. Vivian swallowed hard. Her voice came out strained. I didn't think about that, she admitted. Daniel nodded once. I know. Vivian's chest tightened. She looked away briefly because she couldn't hold his gaze anymore. The office felt smaller now. The air felt heavy. Vivian's voice came out quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. Daniel didn't answer right away. When he finally did, he said, "I believe you." Vivian's throat tightened again. Not relief, something worse, because belief meant he was letting her carry it. Vivian stared at him. Her voice came out low. "Do you forgive me?" she asked. Daniel looked at her for a long time. The silence stretched until Vivian felt it in her skin. Then Daniel said, "I don't know yet." Vivian's chest tightened. The honesty hurt more than rejection would have. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "I don't say that to punish you," he added. "I say it because forgiveness isn't a switch." Vivian nodded faintly. She didn't trust herself to speak. Daniel's voice stayed quiet. "I have to see what you do next," he said. Vivian swallowed. Her throat felt raw. "I understand," she managed. Daniel studied her for a moment longer. Then he said, "Sit down." Vivian hesitated. The chair across from him felt like surrender. But she sat. The leather was cold. Her posture stayed straight, but her shoulders felt heavy. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I'll tell you something," he said. Vivian looked up. "When you fired me yesterday," Daniel continued, "I wanted to hate you." Vivian's stomach tightened. Daniel's eyes stayed steady. "But I couldn't," he said. Vivian frowned slightly. "Why not?" she asked. Daniel's voice lowered. "Because I've seen what your father did to himself," he said, "and I've seen what you've been trying to outrun." Vivian felt her throat tighten again. She stared at him. Daniel continued, "You don't know how to stop, because you don't believe anyone will love you if you're not useful." Vivian's breath caught. Her fingers gripped the armrest slightly. Daniel didn't soften the words, but he didn't weaponize them either. Vivian's voice came out barely above a whisper. "That's not true." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then prove it," he said. Vivian stared at him. The room felt silent. Then Daniel spoke again. "Your father asked me to stay on," he said, "to keep advising him." Vivian nodded. "I know." Daniel's gaze held hers. "But he also asked me to advise you," he said. Vivian's chest tightened. "What did you say?" she asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "I told him I would meet you once, and I did." Vivian's jaw tightened. "And?" Daniel's voice stayed calm. "And now I'm deciding." Vivian felt the weight of that. Not like a threat, like a boundary. Vivian nodded slowly. "Fair," she said. Daniel studied her for a moment. Then he said, "If I agree, there will be conditions." Vivian's stomach tightened. "Name them," she said. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "No more public humiliation," he said. "No more firing people to make an example. No more demanding loyalty while offering fear." Vivian listened, her face still. Daniel continued, "And if someone needs to leave for their family, they leave," he said. "Without punishment, without suspicion." Vivian swallowed. Her voice came out quiet. "That will change the culture." Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said. "That's the point." Vivian sat back slightly. For the first time, she felt the full scale of what this meant. Not a single apology, not one rehiring. A complete dismantling of the way she'd been running her life. Vivian stared at Daniel. Then she nodded. "All right," she said. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're agreeing too fast," he said. Vivian's mouth tightened. "I'm not negotiating," she replied. "I'm listening." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Good," he said. Vivian's chest felt tight. She wasn't sure if she had just gained something or lost something. But she knew she couldn't walk out of this room and pretend she was the same person. Vivian left Daniel's office and didn't go straight to the elevator. She walked down the hallway slowly, hands at her sides, trying to keep her breathing even. She felt exposed, not because anyone had seen her go in, because she had sat down. because she had asked for forgiveness and accepted the answer she didn't want. She reached the end of the hall and stopped near the break area. Someone had left a mug in the sink. A spoon sat beside it, stained with dried coffee. Vivian stared at it longer than necessary. Small mess, small proof of someone having a morning. She used to hate things like that. Disorder. Evidence of time being wasted. Now it looked human. She turned and walked back toward the receptionist's desk. The woman stood up immediately. "Ms. Hart." Vivian nodded slightly. "What's your name?" she asked. The receptionist blinked. "Lena." Vivian held her gaze. "Lena, I want you to tell everyone on this floor something." Lena looked nervous. "Yes, ma'am." Vivian exhaled slowly. "If they need to leave early for their family, they don't ask permission anymore," Vivian said. "They inform their supervisor, and they go." Lena stared. Vivian continued. "If anyone gives them trouble, they come to Aaron. If Aaron gives them trouble, they come to me." Lena's mouth parted slightly. "Yes, ma'am," she said. But it sounded uncertain, like she didn't believe she was hearing it. Vivian nodded once. She walked away before Lena could ask questions. Back in the elevator, Vivian stared at the floor indicator as it rose, 15 to 32. When the doors opened to her floor, the usual quiet settled around her. Glass walls, soft carpet, people moving with controlled urgency. Mara looked up from her desk as Vivian stepped out. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You were on 15, Mara said. It wasn't a question. Vivian paused. "Yes," she replied. Mara studied her face. For a moment, Vivian thought she might ask more. But Mara only said, "Your 10:30 is here. Conference room A." Vivian nodded. "Thank you." She walked into her office and closed the door. The room felt the same as always. The skyline, the clean desk, the faint smell of cedar. But she didn't feel the same. She sat down slowly. Then she opened her laptop. Her calendar was packed. Back-to-back meetings, quarterly reviews, strategy sessions, the machine of her life. Vivian stared at it. Then she clicked. She began canceling. One meeting, then another. Not all of them, not the ones that mattered, but the ones that existed because she had been afraid of empty space. She canceled the lunch briefing. She canceled the redundant follow-up. She canceled the late-night review session. When she was done, there was a gap in her calendar. A full hour. Vivian stared at it. Her chest tightened. She felt the urge to fill it immediately, to call someone, to schedule something, to prove she was still working. Instead, she stood up. She walked out of her office and down the hall toward conference room A. The meeting was with the regional directors. A room full of people who were used to her sharpness, used to being corrected, used to leaving meetings with a sense of fear disguised as motivation. Vivian walked in. The room went quiet immediately. Everyone stood. "Ms. Hart," someone said. Vivian nodded once. "Sit," she said. They sat quickly. Vivian took her seat at the head of the table. She opened the folder in front of her, but didn't look at the numbers right away. She looked at the people. Some avoided her eyes. One man older, gray at the temples, met her gaze steadily. He looked tired, but he didn't flinch. Vivian took a breath. Her voice came out calm. "I'm changing how we operate," she said. The room stayed silent. Vivian continued. "This company has achieved growth through discipline. That won't change." A few people nodded slightly, relieved. Then Vivian said, "But discipline isn't the same as punishment." The air shifted. She saw it on their faces. Confusion, uncertainty, suspicion. Vivian kept her voice steady. "If an employee needs to attend the family obligation, they attend it," she said. "They inform their supervisor, and they go." Someone shifted in their seat. Vivian continued. "If that absence causes a gap, the supervisor fills it. That is what leadership is." No one spoke. Vivian felt her heart thudding hard. She forced herself to keep going. "We do not sacrifice people for appearances," she said. Her voice stayed calm, but she felt the words scrape her throat. One of the directors cleared his throat. "Ms. Hart, with respect, he began. Won't this create excuses? Vivian finished. The man froze. Vivian nodded slowly. It might, she said, and if it does, we'll deal with it, but we are not going to treat every request like betrayal. The director swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Vivian leaned back slightly. She could feel the room waiting for her to snap, to prove she was still the same person. She didn't. She looked around the table again. I want people to trust this company, she said, not fear it. The words landed heavy. She saw one woman's eyes widen slightly. Another man blinked as if he hadn't expected that sentence to come from Vivian Hart. Vivian nodded once as if confirming it for herself. Meeting adjourned, she said. The directors stood quickly, murmuring polite farewells. As they left, Vivian stayed seated. Mara entered quietly a moment later, holding a tablet. She stopped when she saw Vivian still sitting. Is everything all right? Mara asked. Vivian stared at the table's surface. Her voice came out low. I think I'd been doing it wrong, she said. Mara didn't respond immediately. Then she said quietly, I know. Vivian lifted her eyes. Mara's expression was calm, but there was something in it. Not accusation, not anger. Something tired. Vivian's throat tightened. How long? Vivian asked. Mara hesitated. Since your mother passed, Mara said. The words hit Vivian hard. She blinked once. Mara continued. Before that, you were strict, but you smiled sometimes. You asked people about their weekends. You didn't watch them like they were always about to fail. Vivian's fingers curled slightly. She looked away. Mara stood still, then added, softer. You've been trying to prove something. I think you don't even know what anymore. Vivian swallowed. She felt the sting behind her eyes again. I fired Daniel, Vivian said. Mara nodded once. Yes. Vivian's voice came out strained. And he didn't even hate me. Mara's lips pressed together. That's probably why it hurt, she said. Vivian let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but it wasn't. It was something breaking loose. She stood up. She walked back into her office. The sunlight was stronger now, bright against the glass. Vivian stood by the window for a long time, and she reached for her phone. She scrolled until she found a number she hadn't called in years. Her own. Not her office line. Not Mara's extension. A personal contact. Her father. She pressed call. It rang twice before he answered. Yes? Vivian's voice came out quiet. I want to have dinner, she said. A pause. Elliot didn't speak right away. Vivian continued. Not a gala. Not a meeting. Just dinner. Her father's voice softened slightly. All right, he said. Vivian swallowed. And I want you to tell me about Mom, she added. The silence on the line was long. When Elliot spoke again, his voice sounded rough. Okay, he said. I can do that. Vivian stared out at the city. She felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Not relief. Not happiness. Just a small sense of air returning. She ended the call and stood still. Her office phone rang. Vivian didn't answer it immediately. She watched it ring. Then stop. Then ring again. She let it ring until it stopped a second time. The quiet after felt strange. Almost wrong. But she didn't feel it. She walked to her desk and opened the drawer where she kept the termination papers. Daniel Brooks' file sat on top. She stared at it. Then she pulled it out. She didn't tear it up. She didn't hide it. She held it in her hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of what she'd done. Then she placed it back in the drawer. Not as a trophy, not as something to forget, as something to remember. Vivian sat down slowly. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, for the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to chase it. She just sat. And she let herself be still,